There are many signs that spring is right around the corner here in Turkey, but this rainy day called for something comforting, so I wanted to show you how my mother-in-law makes a classic Turkish soup called Sulu Köfte. This soup features mini meatballs and chickpeas, all enhanced with warm spices. I hope you enjoy. To begin, my mother-in-law measured out some dried chickpeas to put in the pressure cooker, then thoroughly washed them before adding them to the pot and completely covering them in water. Just note, she measured out way more than you'd need for this recipe, since she was planning to use the rest for another dish, but roughly all you need is about a cup of dried chickpeas for this one. I prefer pressure cooking in an Instant Pot, and if you've soaked the beans overnight, you can pressure cook them for about 20 minutes or so, and if they haven't been soaked overnight, I'd say about an hour in the Instant Pot will work. I know in the US it's more common to find canned chickpeas, and 2 cans will work just as well. If that's the case, you can just save them for later. While your chickpeas are cooking, you can get started on the meatballs. My mother-in-law is making a double batch of meatballs to freeze half to use later, so you just need to half the measurements that I give here. She used about 2 pounds of ground beef and then added roughly a half a cup of fine-grained bulgur. Bulgur is cracked wheat and very common in many Turkish dishes, but it's not as prevalent in the US. Typically you can find them at Mediterranean or Middle Eastern markets or even on Amazon. To that, she added 3 teaspoons of pul biber, which is essentially red pepper, a teaspoon of black pepper, and about 3 teaspoons of salt. I'm doing my best with measurements for you because my mother-in-law just eyeballs everything, so don't feel the need for all the measurements to be absolutely perfect, because as I say, baking is a science, but cooking is an art. After thoroughly mixing the ingredients by hand until everything was well incorporated, we sat down for the more tedious part of the job. The meatballs just need to be rolled into small balls, roughly the size of your fingertip. Try to keep them about the same size so that they all cook through at the same time. Mine started off a bit big at first, but I went ahead and fixed them later. And throughout the process, the meatballs were lightly dusted with flour to keep them from sticking to each other. This part of the recipe takes a little time, but trust me, it's well worth it. After you've created your meatballs, you can get started on the soup. My mother-in-law finally chopped up 2 really small onions and then added them to a large pot with a generous amount of oil to sauté. I know that she used a little sunflower oil and a little olive oil, but just use whatever you prefer. And then to that she added about 2 teaspoons of salt. After allowing the onions to sauté for a bit, she also added a heaping tablespoon of red pepper and tomato paste mix that was actually handmade. I know from experience that pepper paste is really hard to find in the US, so just tomato paste will work perfectly well. Finally, add roughly 5 cups of water and your meatballs. As I mentioned, my mother-in-law was going to freeze half the meatballs, so only half of what we made was actually added to the pot. As the soup was simmering away, we also made some rice as a side. Growing up, our starch of choice was always potato, so I never really made much rice until I met my husband. And I had no idea that rice actually needs to be rinsed until my husband shockingly observed me making some without doing so. Even though I think it's kind of a pain in the butt, I always rinse my rice now. The chickpeas finished cooking and were nice and tender, so we added maybe a little over 2 cups to the soup. Or if you're adding canned chickpeas, you can go ahead and add about 2 cans worth here. Then for a bit of spice, she added about 1 teaspoon of chili pepper flakes, and finally about 2 teaspoons of dried basil. We let the soup continue to simmer on the stove while the meatballs cooked through. Next, I made a simple side salad to go with lunch. I've been to quite a few grocery stores in Turkey and have yet to find any bagged or pre-washed lettuce. I don't know if they just don't exist here, but it hasn't been my experience that they're easy to find. Needless to say, I will be investing in a salad spinner when we finally get settled because washing each leaf by hand is a little bit time consuming. After about 30 to 45 minutes of simmering on the stove, the Sulu Köfte was finally ready, and its warming smells lingered in the air. To cool the palate of the warm soup, we also had a big bowl of homemade yogurt to go with it. The soup was filling and warm, perfect for such a gray spring day. I hope you get a chance to make this soup for yourself, and I left the recipe in the description of this video. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch. I really appreciate it. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more in the future. Thanks!